It's time for some vintage audio restoration. We have a really nice Pioneer SA-9800 on the bench today. It's going to be a big restoration job. Not only a full recap, but the majority of the small transistors in the unit will also get changed. And we'll get a new power light and whatever else work it needs. Cosmetically, it's in really good condition. Especially the front, it looks pretty much untouched. Electronically, it needs a little repair. You'll see why. I don't know if you can hear that hum. That 120 hertz hum. That's usually a pretty good sign that the filter capacitors are bad. And this particular amplifier has dual power supplies and 2 banks of filter capacitors. So those are definitely the most expensive part in this amplifier. I think those were $16 to $18 a piece for those caps. I'll have to look at the parts list and see exactly how much I had to pay for those. Another problem this has is the left channel will just all of a sudden get really distorted and crackly, and you'll actually see the level decrease on the meter as well. It acts like it's a intermittent control, you know, a bad connection somewhere, but I'm kind of wondering if it's something on the either in the preamp circuit or the power amp on that side. Even in its current condition though, I can tell it's going to sound amazing when it's done because it sounds good just like this. Very nice control setup too. There's mode switch for stereo, reverse stereo, mono, left or right. So it's just really handy for, you know, just any kind of source you can put into it. You can make it sound the way you want. It's even got cartridge load selectors for the phono cartridge, and really adjustable tone controls, you know, the traditional knobs, plus tone defeat switch and the turnover frequency switches for the bass and treble controls. Very sweet. Gonna have to replace the pilot light on the power switch there. It's painfully loud. This is 100 watts per channel. Nice big fat volume knob. All the controls are detented controls. Very nice feel to them. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is try to get these filter capacitors changed out and see if that hum goes away. And then I can start on the rest of the boards. Here's a look at the underside of the amplifier with the bottom cover removed. You can see the output transistors. The bottom of the power supply board there. Actually, that's just the rectifier board. This is actually the power supply here. Nice layout in this amplifier. Some of these things are going to be hard to get out and work on though, I can tell you right now. But like I said, I'm going to tackle the power supply first. Here's one of the new filter capacitors. Big old Panasonic THA series. 15,000 microfarads at 80 volts. And it's the 4-lug type. It's going to be a pain to get these changed out. Oh well, gotta get started. Well, the main filter caps didn't look too bad as far as AC ripple, but these 2 axial lead ones on the power supply board here aren't so good. This one's got 1.7 volts of ripple on it, and about 75 volts DC, I think. Yeah, could be better. Here's a good example of why these transistors are getting replaced. This one runs extremely hot. I've already installed the new one in the heatsink, but you can see that There's a pretty big burn mark on there just from the heat from that transistor. It's unreal. Caps are all done on the power supply. Once I got a couple more transistors and a couple diodes to change, and I'm all done with this board. It's coming along pretty well. It's been about an hour so far. I don't know if that's good or bad. I think half my time has gone into double checking, you know, to make sure everything's in the right spot. Like some of these new transistors have the opposite pinout as the originals, so you really got to make sure you put them in the right way. A couple hours into it, the power supply is finally complete. All but two of the original transistors have been replaced because they're kind of unique. I think they're MOSFETs actually. Those are probably okay anyway. I did find one bad transistor in the 100-volt circuit, so that's been changed out. Solder joints have been checked over. I'm ready to put this thing back in and hope that it's going to power up and run. Maybe that'll take care of that humming problem too. And I think the rest of it should be a little bit easier, at least I hope. Alright, everything's back in now for the power supply. You guys are going to get to see the first power up no matter what happens. Even if something goes kaboom, I'll leave it in the video. So here we go. No smoke yet. Relay's not letting out though. That's not cool. More work to do. Well, good news and bad news. The good news is power supply seems to be working correctly. Bad news is the reason there was no relay kicking out was because the protection board was toasted. All because earlier when I was working on it, taking the power supply out, it was either this little yellow wire or this little green wire. I had it detached when I had this board flipped up, and it just had to go over and touch right on the center lead of that transistor there, which had 60 volts on it from these filter caps, even after sitting for 3 or 4 days. So because I forgot to discharge those caps, I figured they would have done on their own, but regardless, it blew 3 transistors and 3 diodes on the protection board. Good thing is I had the transistors on hand because they needed to be changed anyway, but I did not have the diodes, so I have to order another batch of parts. It's not going to be very expensive, but it's a, you know, it's going to add a little more time. I wanted to get this up and running tonight, and now I can't do that. It ticks me off. But I think some of the harder stuff is done. I don't think the amp boards are going to be all that hard. I'm not really looking forward to going through some of these other boards that are buried in here though. They're kind of hard to get out. I had to disassemble the frame just to get the protection board out of there. So follow up as soon as I get those diodes in. Taking a look at the what they call the protection board now. It's got the headphone circuit on it, a speaker protection relay, and I think there's also some of the display circuitry on this board here. Got those 3 transistors replaced, and I've also got to replace 3 or 4 diodes. I got to look and see which ones are bad. I've got them here on the bench. I've got my lead bending tool that gets the spacing exactly right to fit in the board without having to do it manually. Get these in here, and hopefully this thing's going to start up and run like it should, and I can continue with the repair. Now that the protection board is hopefully fixed, my other fear is that there may be a problem on the display board, because that also goes through the protection board, but let's hope nothing bad happens this time. Well, I hear a relay. Hey, what do you know? No more hum. Very awesome. Yep, no more annoying buzz now that the power supply has been rebuilt. I think the rest will be a little bit more laid back, so to speak. Onward. Still got the intermittent distortion on the left channel, but I think that's probably somewhere farther down the line. Very distorted. Here's the right channel. And now it's starting to clear up. That problem comes and goes. I'm interested in finding what's causing that. Almost done with the display board now. It's pretty easy to access. Just got 2 screws that hold it into the faceplate, and the whole assembly will lift right out. And just got to solder 2 more caps, and I can put it back in and move on to the next. I think there's only a couple caps on these 2 little boards, and then the biggest one is under this cover here. And then I think the last thing I'm going to do is the power amp boards. Making some pretty good progress today. I just finished what they call the EQ board. I had to take this cross brace and some metal covers off here and disconnect 5 or 6 wires to pull this board out and tilt it so it was accessible. There was a lot of capacitors on that board. I'm going to inspect it, make sure the solder joints are all good, and get them covers back on and give this thing another test before I go any further. All that's left to do now is the amplifier boards and the main filter capacitors. The amp boards are pretty easy to remove. You just got to pull out these 2 plastic pegs, and that releases it from the top, and then the bottom edge just sits in a little slot in the metal. And once you lift it out of that, you can push it right out the bottom of the amplifier and flip it over to work on it. There are a couple wires that need to be disconnected to make enough room, mainly the orange and red leads from the power supply, and the green wire that I believe is the speaker output. That gets in the way too, so I usually take those 3 off to make more slack to pull the board out. And other than that, it's pretty straightforward. Now the black wire's a little bit in the way on this one, so I'm going to take that off to give myself a little more room. Just use a wire unwrapping tool like this. Slide it right off the post, and when you want to reattach it later, you can slide it back on, spin it around with some needle nose pliers, and put a bit of solder on it. Alright, working on the other amp channel now. I've got the 3 capacitors already changed, and I'm working on changing the potentiometers. There's 3 of those on each channel as well. The old potentiometer here is a 47K and the replacement is a 50K. However, that does not matter because they're hooked up in what I would call 2-wire configuration, where the center lead and outer lead are connected together. So it's basically just being used as a variable resistor. So you just got to set adjust the new one to the same as what the old one measures between those 2 connections, and you'll have the exact same number of ohms between the 2 points on the board as what the old one had. That way you should be able to turn it right on and be almost exactly where you need to be with your adjustments, and then of course fine tune everything afterwards. Well, I had one of these transistors off the amp board to replace the thermal grease. I figured I'd show you another piece of equipment that I use. This is my Atlas DCA-55. Tell you the pin out of the transistor, what polarity it is, and all the other specs. I use this to make sure that I'm replacing transistors with the right type and getting the pin out correct, because especially when I'm working tired, it's easy to forget which way something will face. One thing to look for is the leakage current. In this case, this transistor is good. There's no leakage current at all. If the leakage current were up a bit, it would probably be a noisy. In an audio circuit, it would be making excessive hiss or random static noises, things like that. Or it could make something overheat because it would increase bias current or something like that. Germanium transistors, however, normally have a little bit of leakage, but in the case of a silicon one like this, you don't want any. So I'm just going to get this transistor put back on here, and I think this board is ready to put back in and adjust. Everything's been changed already. One thing I don't like is that bottom potentiometer there. The adjustment knob is on the top, and it's going to be impossible to get a tool down in there to adjust that. But I'm sure I'll figure out a way. The old potentiometers sure were a mess, so this ought to make it a little more stable. I'm working on getting the DC offset and bias currents all adjusted. They're pretty touchy, but it's supposed to be at 56 millivolts, and it drifts up really slowly as the amp warms up, so I'm just waiting for that to settle and tweak it to perfection. Since the DC offset potentiometers are now multi-turn pots, it was easy to zero those right in to like under 1 millivolt of DC offset, which is really good considering the service manual calls for within 60 millivolts. So I'm going to finish tweaking this up and see how this baby sounds, and then after that I got to do some adjustments on the EQ board, just make sure that's all set where it's supposed to be. Wanted to get a quick shot of what this thing looks like with the cover in place. This is a custom made solid wood cover that was done by a local woodworker using the original metal grill, and it's beautiful. Wish I would have made more video on this project, but I was trying to work as fast as I could and missed out on a lot of stuff.